Few games have taken two heavily clashing genres and bashed them together so hard they ended up interlocking perfectly. Koudelka, the subject of today's video, is no exception to this rule. It's a clunky, messy affair filled to the brim with cringeworthy voice acting and Muppets for character models, but when you dig a little deeper, you find that it somehow works. Consisting of the baffling combination of survival horror cross-grid-based JRPG, what Koudelka lacks in polish it more than makes up for in charm and ingenuity. Set in a late 19th century Aberystwyth, Wales, you take the role of Koudelka, a gypsy medium who is beckoned to an eerie monastery by a mysterious voice. In typical gypsy fashion, she helps herself inside and starts pilfering shit. Immediately, Koudelka meets another morally absent bandit by the name of Edward Plunkett, based on the Irish writer of the same era. After discovering the monastery is crawling with undead horrors, they decide to team up to find the source of the mysterious voices. From here, the player takes control of Koudelka and is free to roam the pre-rendered backgrounds and slowly shuffle towards nightmarish fiends with the mutual understanding that they take turns pummeling each other. The map traversal is basically Resident Evil sans tank controls. I fucking hate tank controls, but after playing the game for 10 minutes, I found myself longing for their warm embrace. The main issue with conventional controls on backgrounds that have vastly different camera angles is that the directions aren't consistent. The advantage to tank controls in this scenario is that you know when you press up on the directional pad, you'll move forward relative to the character, not to the camera. Occasionally up will send you westward, while in another map it can send you more towards the east. This wouldn't be a major issue, but unlike Resident Evil, there are mini load screens when you move to a different area, so instead of an instant jump from one camera to another, we have a fade out, then a fade into a new map. A handful of the maps require moderately precise movements to avoid a transition, so not knowing where your up button will take you can force you to sit through extra load screens. Simply removing the fade transitions or adding consistent controls would have fixed this problem, and it will grate on you, especially considering the amount of backtracking and exploring you'll do. The layout of the monastery is quite interesting, and some of the maps have really unique designs, which is great as the entirety of the game takes place within. There are a very small number of save rooms, and to access a save, you must defeat a boss prior. You get a fairly extensive warning, and once defeated, water begins to flow freely through the scenery, drawing attention to the save point. It works because you get a warning beforehand, and you genuinely earn that save point. But when you're looking to save, you're probably not in any position to fight a boss. There are temporary saves in other areas, so you can quit playing if you need to. When you enter a room, it will display an S symbol alongside the name. If you hit circle, it will prompt you to perform a temporary or suspended save. These don't heal the player, but it saves having to backtrack or quickly dispatch a boss to turn the game off. Pre-rendered backgrounds outline how creative developers could be when selecting camera angles and deciding on how best to utilize any given shot, either in an attempt to accentuate detail or to mask it. Occasionally, the mask works too well, as Koudelka can't freely move up and down stairs as she pleases. To use a staircase, you must approach it, then press the action button to trigger a computer-controlled event where the character model locks to the stairs and automatically ascends or descends. This can be off-putting, as older, pre-rendered backgrounds are often muddy and don't scale particularly well. Maybe the developers were inexperienced and couldn't set hit detection properly for different elevations, or maybe they just got lazy. I refuse to believe it was intentional because there's no logical reason for stairs to be contextual. This isn't the only thing that hinders that sense of progression either. You'll encounter sporadic cutscenes full of what seems like exposition, but is mostly just pointless banter. The characters never really go anywhere, and a lot of the dialogue is unnecessary. It feels like the main cast suffer from extreme bursts of bipolar as they shift attitudes so rapidly. I get what they were trying to achieve with spurts of narrative, but it falls short and largely serves to break momentum. There are also no subtitles, so that's fucking great. The cutscenes are fully voice acted, and while the audio quality is choppy in parts and the delivery is downright cringeworthy, it's a nice touch and probably why Koudelka requires 4 CDs for a 10-hour experience. To be fair, most of that time is derived from the combat. Enemies appear in the form of random encounters, which teleport the player to a 6x5 grid where you shuffle the fuck around until one party expires. There's a lot to the combat system, but it's all kept fairly simple, and other than the notorious PS1 bloat and some mild balancing issues, there's not much to dislike. Upon entering a battle, we get a fairly detailed look at the foe sitting across the grid from our party. Enemy variety is quite large, which is probably due to the brevity of the story and includes everything from hovering dresses to orgies. Moving around the grid itself is a mixed bag. The farthest character from the respective back row effectively functions as a wall, which you must destroy to move past. This means you can send your tank to the front, leave your spellcasters behind, and they'll be physically unreachable. It also means the enemy can do the exact same thing. You can knock enemies back, but to my knowledge, it's based solely on luck, and the inconsistency renders it unviable for any strategy. You also can't move through your own allies, so if you're forced to the back row, you'll find movement becomes completely pointless unless you can advance that front, which again seems to be based on luck. It's important to be aware of what space you currently occupy and what space you'd like to occupy, then plan ahead with that in mind. At a certain point, magic becomes so powerful that positioning becomes more or less redundant, and enemies send you back so often that you might as well just hug the back wall to save time, as the bloat genuinely hurts the combat system. In-battle animations are quite basic, and the walk cycle's so drawn out that you'll notice the lack of fluidity. It shows how far a little polish can go, as much like most Ham planets, characters look like they have mini seizures when you force them to exercise. Both the physical and magical attacks have an associated proficiency level. The more you use them, the more proficiency they gain, which eventually leads to them gaining levels, which grant performance benefits. Each weapon type and spell has a separate proficiency, so if you use guns for half the game, then switch to spears, you'll notice a large decrease in performance. Higher proficiency for melee grants an increased chance for combos to trigger, and well-used spells can target multiple enemies at once, but there are some downsides to each. When you use weapons, you run the risk of them breaking. With each repeated use, you'll draw nearer and nearer to saying goodbye to your weapon permanently. Spells double in MP cost each time they level, but MP is something you can permanently increase, so the penalty is significantly less. That said, permanently increasing MP comes at a cost, but we'll get to that in a second. Upon leveling up, each character is given 4 points to assign to any of the 8 stats. Most stats are the standard affair, but the magic stats are slightly tweaked, and they've effectively become double-edged swords. Intelligence impacts magic damage, piety, or pie for short, is a delicious baked good, and mind functions much like dexterity but for magical accuracy. Now in all seriousness, piety is an incredibly interesting stat because it increases maximum MP and magic resistance, but when it says resistance to magic, it means all magic, healing included. So there's this interesting situation where your magic walls can be borderline unhealable if their piety is too high and you don't have the intelligence to keep up with it. You fucking dumb. While you won't really stray from conventional builds, attempting a hybrid build can easily see you become so powerful that you can't even heal yourself. Since Koudelka is fairly loose when it comes to balance, it's nice to see incentives to keep defense relatively low and thus keep the challenge alive. However, proper balance would have gone a long way. Staying true to the survival horror roots, guns have ammo which requires manual reloading. I don't really have much to say here, I just thought it was really neat that you could reload in and out of battle. It shows that while Koudelka is more JRPG than survival horror, they didn't forget to add the little touches from each genre. The main issue with ammo is that you have a limited inventory space, and with all the key items you'll be required to carry, it can get very messy very quickly. The monastery is full of useful shit, such as weapons and healing items, as well as story-specific key items to help you progress. To avoid backtracking, it's incredibly important to interact with and acquire almost everything, which is why the limited inventory can become a pain. Finally, I want to briefly address the endings and the circumstances leading to them. There will be minimal spoilers. I'm not going to go into detail regarding story elements, but spoiler warning regardless. So, at a certain point in the story, there's a pendant sitting on a fountain which you need to fight the final boss. If you miss it and you get to the end of Disc 4, you can't return to pick it up. Attempting to fight the ultimate antagonist will see the player's faces melt off in this extremely graphic cutscene. Luckily, there's a hidden encounter just to the side of the boss room where you'll fight an extremely easy enemy that drops that very same pendant and reveals a hidden save point. The developers weren't dickish enough to make you restart the entire game, and I genuinely appreciate that because I missed it in this playthrough. When you engage the final boss, there are 2 potential endings. If you win, you get the good ending, and if you lose, you get the bad ending. To my knowledge, the bad ending is canon as it leads directly into the Shadowheart series, and the two, despite being titled good and bad, are very similar. Koudelka and Edward end up living either way, and leave the monastery with their goals accomplished and their pants intact. Soiled, but intact. It's a very strange way to end a game, but it's not unwelcome. If you go into the final encounter knowing that a defeat will still reward you with an ending, it's little more than an anticlimax. There's no real drive or reason to beat the boss other than to beat the boss. If the endings offered something majorly different, it wouldn't be an issue, but they don't. In conclusion, Koudelka is a fucking mess, but they put jiggle physics on a backwards spider muppet, so go play it.